So Cory Doctorow, who's an excellent wordsmith, just told me that the secret is really working on it and working on words on the page, in events, before crowds, see what works, what doesn't. This popped into my head. So what, Cory, is your version of "and Mexico will pay for it," which was only introduced by Trump because he said it before a crowd and they loved it. So do you have one of those? You didn't think it would work and the reaction was amazing?
Yeah. And then, what I tend to do, like Trump, I guess, like Trump, is double down and so elaborate it. So, for example, when I talk about the price of ink for your inkjet printer.
Oh, that's so good. I love that one.
I think people really relate to. I always say that it's the most expensive fluid you can buy as a civilian without a special permit, and that you could print your grocery list with the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion and still save money.
Right. And sometimes I've heard you do a step up piece of rhetoric where it's more expensive when they talk about, the price of milk. It's more expensive than a gallon of gas. By the way, milk is more expensive than gas. And then you do the Kentucky Derby one and the crowd goes wild.
$10,000 a gallon is what printer ink costs. So it's a very expensive fluid.
But if I wanted to print out the full terms of agreement from Apple, I couldn't do it with Kentucky Derby semen, could I?
I guess that depends on your relationship to racehorse owners.
I couldn't inseminate a prize filly with an inkjet printer and expect it to run regularly.
In that regard, printer ink is less useful than the semen of a Kentucky Derby winning stallion, for sure. There are other ways in which it's less useful as well.
So do you know, unlike with bull riding, the semen in thoroughbred racing, it's not semen. It is semen, but the substance isn't traded. It has to come from within the horse in live mating in order to continue to be qualified for the Kentucky Derby. So it is kind of, there's an asterisk to that analogy, I think.
Well, sure. But of course you can only get an original HP inkjet printer to force ink out of that HP cartridge. So there is maybe an analogy.
Yeah. I think Ticketmaster and your printers are the two least popular things on earth. I know everyone makes fun of Nickelback, but I think if a politician were just to run on inkjet reform, that politician would, I'm not going to say win, but gain like 6 points in the polls.
Well, I know you're kidding, but like one of the issues. Okay. Well, one of the issues that is really key to this book is this idea of interoperability, making one thing work with another. Anyone's shoelaces go in your shoes, anyone's gas goes in your gas tank. And you have these companies that have blocked interoperability using a variety of legal means. So, this is printer companies blocking you from using generic ink and Apple blocking you from using any app store and so on. And the most progress we've made on interoperability has been in state legislatures, and it's been through right to repair laws that ban companies from blocking third-party diagnostics and parts and service. And at EFF, we've been thinking about a parallel campaign for right to print. We think that there's a lot of space in state ledge for bills that just say, printer companies are not allowed to interfere with your decision to use generic ink.
Is Canon or the printer companies, is HP so powerful that would be a big haul? I mean, I know they're somewhat powerful, but they don't seem as powerful as Amazon.
Well, this is the key, right? We're getting off the topic of the book, but into the topic of my career as an activist, which is where the book came about.
EFF is Electronic Frontier Foundation.
Yeah, I've worked for them for most of my adult life. I'm in my 24th year working for them now as an activist. I used to be their European director and worked all over the world.
So if you were a tech platform, you'd now be in your Enshittification phase.
That's correct. Yeah, and funnily enough, EFF has gone in the other direction and has disenshittified and become
but they've made less money.
Well, that's true. So the thing that we discovered working on interoperability and then on right to repair is that if you decompose the issue into smaller issues, you get less done with every bill, but you break up the coalition that's fighting you. So our first efforts with the Repair Coalition and Repair.org and iFixit and other partners was something called where these muscular right to repair bills that we introduced in, I think it was 18 legislatures in 2018, maybe it was 20. And the coalition against them was everyone, right? It was the automakers, it was Apple, it was Microsoft, it was Google. Vol, the company that makes the shavers. You remember we all bought a Vol shaver during the lockdown?
Oh, yeah, it's spelled with a W, but it's German. I did not know it was pronounced Vol, like a small burrowing animal. Probably.
Yeah, I think it's pronounced Vol. Yeah. So they joined the Anti-Repair Coalition because they had started booby-trapping the shaver heads with a little spring. When you took them apart to sharpen them, it flew apart and you couldn't put it back together again, so you had to buy a new head. It's just this insane coalition. And so we started breaking down the bills. So we took an automotive right to repair to Massachusetts voters in the ballot in 2020, and we saw like a 77% approval for just the automotive side. And then in Colorado, we did one for powered wheelchairs. And powered wheelchairs are such a scam. There's 2 private equity owned companies that make all the powered wheelchairs. They bought all their competitors. Medicare only pays for indoor wheelchairs. So these are indoor wheelchairs being used outdoors. They break all the time. And the 2 companies that make them have cut back on their maintenance, right? Because they don't have any competitors and only they can fix them. So there's a long wait to get your wheelchair fixed. And so when your wheelchair breaks, you can end up in bed for weeks with bed sores, with blood clots, waiting for them to show up and fix your wheelchair. And it's not just fixing it, it's things like small adjustments. Like you change the tire pressure and you want to change the steering sensitivity. That has to be done by an authorized technician. Because there's this law, Section 1201 of the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, this 1998 law that Bill Clinton signed, that bans breaking a digital lock. Because there's a digital lock that stops you from accessing those settings on your own, making the tool that bypasses the lock so that people who use wheelchairs can decide when they're going to adjust their wheelchairs. That's a felony punishable by a 5-year prison sentence and a $500,000 fine. So you need state ledge. You need legislative action that says, okay, if you want to sell a wheelchair in Colorado, you're not allowed to do this. Right?
Imagine
they can't change the federal.
Imagine that in lockup conversation between the 2 guys, 2 cellies sitting next to each other. What are you in for? Yeah.
Well, and practically it's not that people go to jail, though some people have. We had a mathematician who was arrested after giving a technical presentation about the problems with Adobe ebooks. He was Russian. And when he got back to Russia, the Russian State Department issued guidance to Russian scientists not to present at American learned conferences because sometimes they put you in prison for talking about math. But it's that anyone who wants to go out and start a business doing this, you go, pitch your business and then they say, no, we're not going to give you any capital because they'll just shut you down.
Right. And that's another great argument for the right to repair. It's not that my aged parents will start wrenching on their own wheels. It's that 2 or 3 shops will pop up within wheeling distance of them. So what I'm saying is we're suppressing small businesses. We're suppressing the marketplace, which of course should be the goal of every avowed capitalist in the Senate and the House, but it's not.
And the numbers on repair are incredible. So landfilling a ton of e-waste creates 1 job, and repairing a ton of e-waste creates 150 community jobs, right? And they are in the community because you don't send your wheelchair, your car, your iPhone out of state to get it fixed. You take it down to the guy at the mall who fixes your screen while you wait.
Right. Or even with the iPhone, what about a job where you ship it and they ship it back? That's fine too. That's practical.
Although I think a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to be without my phone for a week, right? They want the guy in the corner. It's a good local business. The money stays in the community and it helps the community and it means you get more out of your stuff. So one of the things Apple does is if you take your broken phone to an Apple store is they offer you a trade-in. And the reason they offer you a trade-in is because their recycling program for iPhones is they shred them to stop any of those parts from getting back into the part stream.
Really? Then why are they so, well, I could understand why they'd want to disqualify your phone for a trade-in if it has a tiny crack on the screen, just because then they wouldn't have to honor their agreement. But also the repair, I just went through this and I'll tell you why I had to get a new iPhone and I didn't want to. But he was very assiduously wiping down the cover. It seemed like he wanted to send it back to HQ in great looking shape.
So they refurb some of them, right? But the ones that are beyond refurb go in a shredder. They don't. So if you dispose of your phone in some other way, chances are it goes to the Pacific Rim and it's decomposed into parts and comes back into the US as parts for independent repair stores. Apple has this very weird scam for this. So they engrave microscopic Apple logos on subassemblies. And that means that every part that might be harvested from an iPhone has an Apple trademark on it. And then they file with the CBP complaints that by re-importing parts that have been harvested from broken phones, that you are committing this very obscure trademark violation called tarnishment, which is when you lower the association in a consumer's mind with a quality brand, because they say, like, maybe if you get a phone fixed with Apple parts that have been refurbished and it stops working because the part was damaged during refurbishing, and you take it apart and look at it through a jeweler's loop and you see the Apple logo, you might think less of Apple as a consequence. And CBP, being useful idiots for this kind of nonsense, they just seize the parts at the border.
That, first of all, part of me says, if you are that clever, just technologically, but also legally, it's almost like a Torah reading. You should get some benefit from that. On the other hand, I want to ask you, so are there legitimate, let's not scrap the tarnishment laws in general. I see the logic of the top line argument that it would tarnish a brand were some reasonable version of that to occur. Or do you think the whole tarnishment law should be scrapped, like so many Apple iPhones in the Pacific Rim?
Well, look, I think trademark, we tend to conflate trademark with copyright. We think like, oh, Apple owns the Apple logo, like copyright would give it control over its code. But trademark foundationally is a consumer protection tort, right? The idea of trademark is that if you go out to buy Pepsi and there's Coke in the can, that you've been cheated, right? And so what trademark does is it empowers firms to act on behalf of their customers to sue people who would introduce confusion in the marketplace. And tarnishment is a very weird fit for that, because you can understand why companies wouldn't like tarnishment. But how does that protect you as a consumer, right? Like, someone else thinks that your phone sucks. Why does that make your life any worse? How is that a consumer protection statute?
Well, I think it's, I don't know, devil's advocate here. You love Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's your top cola. You have, you've done taste tests. You've taken the Pepsi challenge to Pepsi's detriment. And then someone is essentially tricking you into buying Pepsi. It would hurt.
Oh, no,
Coke,
that's fine.
But
that's not tarnishment. Tarnishment is somebody publishes something about Pepsi, or uses puts a Pepsi logo on a little flag and sticks it in all the dog turds in town, so that whenever you think of Pepsi, you think of dog turds, right? Like, that's tarnishment. Right. And it's hard to understand. I understand how that is to Pepsi's detriment. I don't understand how that's to the detriment of people who continue to enjoy Pepsi.
Well, it gets in the way. There's this natural association with dog turds. Take the Coca-Cola fan. If the Coca-Cola polar bears, if someone invented AI where the polar bears were doing untoward things to each other or were on the Epstein list, that could make the taste of Coca-Cola less good.
It feels like a long walk for like a pretty narrow benefit, right? Like, one of the things that, the actual thing that does give firms control over works for their own benefit, which is copyright. One of the things that copyright carves out is commentary and criticism. Like, here's a weird thing, right? If you make fanfic of Harry Potter to celebrate how much you like it, that's a copyright infringement. But if you make fanfic of Harry Potter to talk about how much you hate it, that's arguably fair use, right? So it's actually quite the reverse in the way that we IP law actually works, where we have an IP that redounds to the maker of something. Criticism is the one thing you can't use IP law to prevent. And so, tarnishment, again, it's this very weird fit. It's not statutory, it's created by judges. I think it's just like what my friend Jay Freeman calls felony contempt of business model. Like, I just don't think the government should step in to defend your profits. Like, that's kind of your job. Right.
Okay. We hit the ground running, and now I'll give you the introduction that you so richly deserve, and then we'll decide where to put this, or maybe our listeners will just go along with the ride. I'll orient them beforehand.
It's a hell of a cold open.
Yeah, and say, guys, the introduction's coming, but it's like after we talk about Pepsi and dog shit. Here we go. Enshittification is the name of the new book by Cory Doctorow. The subtitle is Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. The everything isn't really everything. I mean, trees are nice and puppies, but it's mostly what we deal with on a daily basis, our technology. And Cory, who's a great wordsmith and has been thinking and working in this field for years and years and years, he lays out a very discernible structure of this process, Inshittification. Things are good, things get bad, then things are shit forever. Cory, welcome to The Gist.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on.
I love your case studies. So why don't you take us through a really good one that we'll identify with that shows the process of Enshittification.
Well, I like Facebook here because they are really the poster child for Enshittification. And statistically, you probably had a Facebook account or an account on another meta platform.
Still do, quite sadly.
Yeah. So that's one of the things Enshittification asks is like, not just how is it that all these platforms are going bad, but why aren't we leaving them? I think that's an important aspect of this. So here's the Facebook case study. In stage 1 of Enshittification, firms are good to their end users, but they find a way to lock those end users in. So Mark Zuckerberg, he rolls out the gate with his first public offering beyond, just kids with a .edu American college address, but the whole world. And he says, look, I know all you people have already got an account on a rival social media network called MySpace. But has it occurred to you that MySpace is owned by an evil, crapulent, senescent Australian billionaire named Rupert Murdoch? And if you come to Facebook, we promise we will never spy on you. And also, we will only show you things that you ask to see. So you tell us who you want to follow, and we'll show you what they post. So that's stage 1. Part of stage 1 is locking users in, and there's lots of different ways to do that. We just talked about it, when we got on the line about like printer ink locking you in and so on. Facebook locks you in through the most dead simple way of all. They really play it on the easy level, which is that they rely on something called switching costs and collective action problems. So the collective action problem is that like you love your friends, but they're a pain in the ass. And you can't agree on like what board game you're going to play this weekend or, what movie you're going to go see. And if there's like 200 of you on Facebook and some of you are there because that's where the people have the same rare diseases you are hanging out, or that's how you like book the carpools for your kids' little league game, or it's where your customers or your audience is, then it's just really hard, like maybe transcendentally hard to get off. And so long as you love your friends more than you hate Mark Zuckerberg, right? So long as you're not willing to pay the switching cost of leaving, Mark Zuckerberg can make stuff worse for you. So that's what he does.
Or at least like them, like the Facebook cultivated, presented to the public with filter version of your friends.
Sure. Yeah. Fine. Yes. But, so long as you're getting more value out of Facebook than Mark Zuckerberg is extracting by tormenting you, you'll stay there, right? So stage 2 of Enshittification, once it's hard for you to leave, Mark Zuckerberg can make it worse for you without risking your departure, and not out of sadism, but to attract business customers. And so he goes to the publishers and he says, hey, you remember we told these rubes we were only going to show them the things that they asked to see. Actually, we will cram anything you want non-consensually into their eyeballs. Take stuff from your own website, excerpt it, put a link at the bottom. We'll give you a free traffic funnel. Some of those people will click the links, some will subscribe to you, some will do both, and that'll be good for you. And to the advertisers, they go, hey, you remember we told these rubes we weren't going to spy on them. Also, obviously a lie. We spy on them from asshole to appetite, give us remarkably small amounts of money, and we will target ads to them with exquisite fidelity. And because I'm such a good-natured slob, I have paid for an entire building of engineers who do nothing but police ad fraud. So you give me $1 to show an ad to a specific user, that user is going to see that ad, right? So that's stage 2. Business customers get locked in too. We underappreciate this, but it's actually a monopsony, which is where you're like a powerful buyer, is much harder to get break free of than a monopoly.
Right. Because like the inverse of a monopoly. Monopoly is one
powerful seller.
This is one buyer. Right?
Yeah.
So Walmart, classic monopsony, they could control prices, and then you as the end user get screwed on pickles.
Sure. Yeah. So like, if you're a business and there's another business that you sell to that is 20% of your market and they go away, that's trouble, right? You get mass layoffs, maybe you never recover. If you're a consumer and there's 5 places where you buy stuff and one of them goes out of business, that's not a big deal. You still got 80% of the market left. So monopsonies are much more powerful and insidious than monopolies. So the publishers and the advertisers, they get locked into the platform too. And stage 3, they turn the screws on those business customers as well. So advertising gets more expensive. Advertising fidelity goes way down. And then the amount of ad fraud explodes beyond anyone's imagination. So Procter & Gamble had a $200 million per year behavioral advertising spend. Behavioral advertising is the euphemism for surveillance advertising. They took that to 0 and their sales fell by 0. Because to a first approximation, $200 million a year was disappearing into the fraud hole, right? For publishers, they found that they had to put more and more content like a longer and longer excerpt just to get seen by their own subscribers, let alone to be recommended. And then Facebook said, oh, well, if there's a link off platform back to your website, we are not going to show it to anyone because maybe that's a malicious link. And so now you have this like fully substitutive mirror of your own website on Facebook that you can only monetize using that crooked ad market. So now you're in stage 3. Facebook has withdrawn all the value, right? The stuff in your feed that you've asked to see is dwindled to a kind of homeopathic residue. The resulting void has been paid with things that people will pay to shove in your eyeballs. The people who are paying to do it are getting ripped off. All the value has been diverted to shareholders and executives. And now the platform is a pile of shit. And sometimes people leave even though they're locked in. And whenever they see like any kind of departure of users, they panic. And being tech bros, they have a technical term for panicking. They call it pivoting. And Mark Zuckerberg one morning like arises from his sarcophagus and says, hearken to me, brothers and sisters. I've had a revelation in the night. I know I told you that the future would consist of you arguing with your racist uncle using the primitive text interface that I created in my Harvard dorm to non-consensually rate the fuckability of undergraduates. But it turns out that the real future is I'm going to turn you and everyone you love into a legless, sexless, low polygon, heavily surveilled cartoon character. And I'm going to imprison you in a virtual world that I stole from a 25-year-old cyberpunk novel that I call the metaverse, right? And that's when the platform is fully just a pile of shit. And that's Enshittification. It's a tragedy in 3 acts.
So the words are dense and wonderful, Cory. I take issue with some of them. Like maybe it's not the case that surveillance advertising is the euphemism for behavioral advertising. Maybe surveillance advertising is the dysphonym for targeted advertising. And advertisers love these tools. And there is a trade-off. I don't know if people consciously enter the trade-off, but when presented with the trade-off, most people do not care, and surveys show that they do not care about being surveilled. They might say they do, but they're They might say they do, but their revealed preference is that they will turn themselves into the product if they get some free services. I think that there are second order horrible effects of more and more efficient advertising, which I think is one of the real problems. But go ahead. Yes, I don't want to cut you
So
off.
I think the revealed preference story is very interesting here because in the theory of revealed preferences, you have to have a field of choices. And the choice can't just be take it or leave it, right? When the choice is take it or leave it, you get a very coarse revealed preference. When you give a finer grain preference, right, like the ability to push back. So 51% of web users have installed an ad blocker, right? That's the largest consumer boycott in human history. Apple turned on a feature in iOS that let people block Facebook spying. 96% of iOS users blocked Facebook spying. Presumably the other 4% were drunk or Facebook employees or drunk Facebook employees, which makes sense because I would be drunk if I worked at Facebook.
Or Procter & Gamble has a lot of employees, you know?
Right. So, I think that it's true that firms would like to create a distributional outcome where things tilt towards themselves. But I think that it's false to say that a firm will exit the market if it can't get 100% of what it wants. In the same way that consumers will tolerate surveillance advertising not given a choice, I think that the entire history of advertising until about 10 years ago shows you that advertisers will tolerate targeting based on content rather than behavior if they're not given a choice. And that choice is a policy matter because the reason that we don't have 100% penetration of ad blockers in all forums is because the US government passed a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act that makes reverse engineering certain technologies a felony. And so we made it a crime to defend your privacy while you use an app. No one's ever installed an ad blocker for an app. Apps are just websites skinned in the right kind of IP to felonize protecting your interests while you use them. And internet companies are desperately horny to get you to not use their websites and use their apps instead.
See, I would say that as an experiment, the do you want an ad blocker one is extremely flawed. Who wouldn't want to not be distracted? But if it were presented as do you want an ad blocker at the cost of either Facebook going away or these ad-supported websites going away. And I remember when I was at Slate, there was some sort of initiative to point out to people that all ad blockers do is rob good journalists of the only means of sustenance that they have. Maybe that's the 4%. Here's what I want to ask you. Do you have the statistics on every time you go to a website now, and this was prompted by EU changes, it asks you if you allow, don't allow, or there's usually some third choice about, what is it? It's not cookies, it's tracking.
It's tracking. It's mostly cookies, but it's also fingerprinting.
Do you have the stats on those? How many don't engage? How many say allow?
Well, no, because that's illegal. And so the problem with the copyright direct or the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which you're talking about here, is that enforcement is in the country of domicile of the company that is violating the law. And all the American tech companies pretend that they're Irish. Because Ireland is a tax haven, and so they'll let them pretend that their money is floating.
Also a magical land.
Yeah, it's floating in a state of untaxable grace, guarded by leprechauns somewhere over the Irish Sea. And the thing is that any company that can pretend that it's Irish this week could pretend to be somewhere else next week. It could be Luxembourgian or Cypriot or whatever, Maltese. And so if Ireland enforces the law, which says that you can't have these cookie consent dialogues, right? What you have to do is if the user ignores the cookie consent dialogue, you just have to not spy on them, right? You have to be able to just click and keep going, right? So there's no click or okay. You know, all that stuff is just illegal under the GDPR. All those cases went to Ireland and died, right? So it's been 9 years since the GDPR was passed. That's about as long as it's been taking to move those cases out of Ireland and into the federal courts, which is where they're landing now. And last year, the EU patched this with the Digital Markets Act that moves enforcement to the federal court for all of these claims. So I think we'll see those cookie consent banners go away. Yeah. And, you know, to your point, like, sure, it give all other things being equal, most people would prefer not to be distracted. But another way of looking at that is if you're in the product planning meeting and you say, well, here at Slate, our KPI is ad revenue. And if we increase the obnoxiousness and intrusiveness of our ads by 20%, we'll get a 2% lift in top line advertising revenue. Someone at the table who does not care about user welfare will stick their hand up and say, you know, Elon, I love how you think, but has it occurred to you that 40% of our users are going to type, how do I block ads into a search engine? So the equilibrium is not no ads.
And no one's ever taken off an ad blocker.
Yeah. And so the equilibrium is not no ads. You know, when I was, so I co-own a company called Boing Boing. I don't work on the website anymore, but in the early days, we had a lot of advertisers come to us with demands for pop-ups and not like the wimpy pop-ups that you get now that are just like a CSS box drawn in the window. It was a whole other window. It was 1 pixel square. It autoplayed audio. It ran away from your cursor, right?
Yeah. Can I tell you that happened? I plugged in an HDMI cable and my TV just kept serving me with HDMI ads. And it wasn't on the bottom of the screen. It would go up on the top of the screen, which somewhat diminishes a television set and a monitor.
Yeah. So, you know, what happened was Opera and then Mozilla, which was the precursor to Firefox, turned on ad blockers and then put them on by default. And we went to our advertisers and we had previously been saying, well, we don't want to do this because our users hate it, right? They didn't care. But then we went to them, we said, we don't want to do this because 95% of the ones we serve are never displayed. And they said, oh, we'll just go with a different kind of ad. That's fine. Pop-ups are not nearly as important as we thought they would. So, you know, I think we want to think about this in the context of an equilibrium, that if there, or, you know, game theory, right? If there are moves and counter moves, then everybody kind of ends up in a steady state eventually. And when you take away the counter move from the user, right, then all you have is the publisher advertiser nexus just making things more obnoxious, more intrusive, more invasive, up to the point where it's so bad that you're ready to leave and try to stay on the right side of that line. And, you know, I don't think it's illegitimate to say we want to shift the equilibrium in some other direction. You know, like if the newspaper wraps every edition in a giant ad wrapper, right, which you sometimes get when back when there were newspapers, you would get like a cover over your newspaper when it's dropped on your doorstep. And I think a lot of people threw those away, right? Sure. Whereas the ad on the page that was next to the article, you'd at least glance at. And so the equilibrium is different, right? It like as an ad salesperson, you probably prefer those big buyouts, but like the job of the government shouldn't be UBI for ad salesmen, right? It should be like...
Right. So I do want to get to more of the big picture questions. Sure. That was an excellent deep dive. And I'm going to summarize the process of Enshittification, just quoting from page 10 of your book. First, platforms are good to their users. Then they abuse their users by making things better for their business customers. Next, they abuse those business customers to claw back all value for themselves. Finally, they become a big pile of shit. That does apply. You've convinced me that very much applies to Facebook. Twitter, it applies to, I think, for different reasons and different incentives. incentives. However, there are all sorts of businesses, all sorts of reasons why this happens in the business cycle. I'm thinking of Home Depot, which when they started was a nirvana, and they knew more than anyone else. And if you saw someone in an orange apron, they were going to help you and they were going to know where every screw was. And then things just started getting bad and shitty. And things get bad and shitty for companies for a number of reasons. One could be, we'll start off good, we'll corner some part of the market, and then who cares? Two could be, there's the founder's curse, that guy who founds it has all these skills, and then when they try to get bigger, the skills don't match the challenge. Then there's the generational curse. The guy who founds it works really hard. My name is on the building. His son's son, piss it all away. There's all these reasons why when a company starts, it's great and then it gets shitty. And in fact, it's also a bit of a, what's that heuristic when you only survivor bias. Yeah. Right, because the companies that start off shitty would never even get any traction. So just talk about that. Is it specific to the tech world as a policy when you compare it to all these non-tech examples where the same or very similar thing seems to happen?
So I would say that the question that I'm interrogating here is not why do firms get worse, because all those reasons you just articulated, obviously, and like the kind of platonic ideal of a firm is one where you charge infinity dollars and you pay $0 to make it, right? And like we understand why that wouldn't work, right? Because there's external sources of discipline on firms. They face competition, they face regulation, and across the board we've seen a weakening of both of those. So general forbearance of the enforcement of antitrust laws over the last 40 years since the Carter administration has seen the cartelization of many sectors, and it's not just that we allow anti-competitive mergers, but you mentioned Home Depot. We stopped enforcing something called the Robertson-Patman Act when we dropped all of these. And Robertson-Patman says that large firms cannot demand preferential discounts from wholesalers. And so one of the reasons Home Depot is still in business is that its wholesale cost, or its retail cost rather, is lower than the wholesale cost of the Ace Hardware in the corner. And so they just are able to squeeze suppliers, right? This monopsony again. So those forces, those act on all kinds of firms.
Can I interrupt? Doesn't essentially every grocery chain operate on the same principle?
So that's the Robertson-Patman Act. They didn't used to, right? The reason we've seen so much consolidation in groceries, and with it, like you had grocery store owners during the pandemic giving investor presentations going like, you wouldn't believe how much we raise prices because people think there's inflation. And yeah, it's 3%, but like we've raised prices 10% and we're really happy about our pricing power, right? That's what is downstream of this is the...
This is called greedflation, or summarized as greedflation.
Excuseflation, greedflation.
Yeah, I've talked about this on the show. There's some of that definitely going on. When you can make more profit, the firms do, but also there are a lot of externalities.
Well, there were supply chain shocks and so on. But when the CEO, under penalty of SEC enforcement for misleading statements, tells his investors, we have pricing power, we're using it, I think we should believe him. Right.
Yeah. Or at least he was bullshitting them.
Right. So yes, who's he lying to? Right.
Yeah.
But I think it's hard to tell that lie and also have more dollars in your bank account at the end of the quarter. And so I think that like we have some confirmation because there were more dollars in their bank account at the end of the quarter too. So, all kinds of firms are subject to this. We've seen market consolidation in every sector: glass bottles, vitamin C, eyeglasses, mattresses, silicon and semiconductors, athletic shoes, professional wrestling, right? All from like 30 companies to 5 or fewer in, 30 years, right? But tech has got some unique characteristics that both enable it to Enshitify and prevented it from Enshitifying. So my favorite is this interoperability, making one thing work with another. And a digital computer, the only one that we know how to make is something that computer scientists call the Turing Complete Universal von Neumann machine. And what that jargon means is that every computer can run every valid program. If you write a program that blocks third-party ink, then I can write a program that unblocks third-party ink. And so that has been a real check. Like if you remember, there was a time when Apple was like really on the ropes in the early 2000s because Microsoft Office for the Mac was so bad that people were throwing away their Macs and buying Windows machines because they couldn't collaborate with Windows users who were, per the antitrust decision against Microsoft, 95% of the desktop operating system market. And the way that Apple resolved that was not by begging Bill Gates to fix Microsoft Office for the Mac. They reverse engineered Microsoft Office. They made iWork, Pages, Numbers, Keynote, which perfectly read and write Office, Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. And that just meant that you could collaborate, right? You could take away this barrier that had been erected. And so that was really powerful. But the growth of IP laws has strictly limited it. And in the meantime, when you take away self-help with this kind of interoperability and this
self-help, define it for not
the ability to help yourself
group thing.
Yeah,
so there's the right to repair.
The right to repair, the right to unrig, the right to take an 11-foot ladder to the 10-foot pile of shit that the company has just installed in your printer, right? That self-help, when it goes away, then all you're left with is digital flexibility in the hands of the sell side, but not in the hands of the buy side. So you can have firms that can change the rules from day to day, right? Your device does 5 things when you buy it, and then the manufacturer looks at your usage pattern and they take away the most popular feature, and then they offer it to you as an upsell, right? And that I call it the Darth Vader MBA. I am altering the deal, pray I don't alter it further. We see that in all kinds of places. On the consumer side and on the labor side. So this twiddling, changing the rules, particularly pernicious when it comes to gig work. So the scholar Ravina Dubel, she calls it algorithmic wage discrimination. You have nurses, and hospitals preferentially hire contract nurses. They want to do union avoidance. So they understaff with staff nurses, and then they hire nurses out of labor agencies. And it used to be that those were regional. You'd have 2 or 3 brick and mortar companies in a town, right? Now it's 4 giant apps. They all call themselves Uber for nursing. And before you get a shift as a nurse, they get your credit history. And if you owe a lot of credit card debt, you get offered a lower wage, right? Well, like, there are coal bosses in Tennessee Ernie Ford songs who would have happily done that to coal miners, but like practically staffing up a large enough, team of Pinkertons to monitor the coal miners' indebtedness, and a large enough team of guys in green eye shades to change their pay packets 11 times a second was just not within reach. So you have this digital flexibility on the capital side, no digital flexibility on the consumer or labor side. And so the Enshittification is much more rapid in tech. It has this unique characteristic. And as tech takes over other sectors like nursing, then you get textile not textile, but in the style of tech, Enshittification of other sectors. And then finally, you have the labor force, right? So tech workers, historically very powerful, even though they weren't unionized, because they were very scarce. And the NBER estimated that every tech worker was generating about $1 million in top line revenue for their employer, right? So employers really wanted those workers, and they really wanted to sweat the asset. They wanted those workers to work long hours. So they said, you are here to change the world. You're a holy monk. We're going to make all the world's information accessible and useful, or we're going to connect the world, these high flying mottos. And it worked. These workers became Tron pilled, right? They fought for the user. They made these products. They skipped their mother's funeral. They slept under their desk. But when the boss said, now it's time to Enshitify it, a lot of those workers were like, hell no, I can get another job across the street this afternoon. And I am not going to break the thing that I sacrificed so much to make out of a sense of mission. But supply catches up with demand. 500,000 tech layoffs in the last 3 years. Tech workers don't hold the line either. So we lost these sources of discipline for tech.
Some top AI workers do, but this
Maybe,
is
that's
but
true.
This is not the average worker. But doesn't supply and demand? I mean, from what I know about nursing and staffing of nursing, there are these nursing shortages. And what you're saying is, when you hear about this visiting nurse phenomenon, this is why the Uber of Nurses app is so prominent. But given that supply and demand catch up with each other, you could try to discriminate against someone, and it's not nice. It's not ethical to discriminate against someone or lower their wages because of their credit score. But from what I understand, when the nursing shortage becomes short enough that all nurses are being thrown, no matter their credit score, and why would it matter, massive bonuses to go to certain hospitals. So it does catch up.
Well, you'd hope that it would, and there have been localized instances of that. But, the Groundwork Collaborative's report on this is just full of nurses who are getting screwed miserably by these apps. And when you have a small number of firms in a sector one of the things that becomes possible is they can either explicitly or implicitly collude to come up with a common set of terms, right? And, you see this, for example, with the duopoly in mobile. So the payment processing fee for mobile is 30%, right? So the actual cost of processing a payment is below 3%. They get 1,000% markup on it. It's like a 30% tax on the entire digital economy levied by two firms. And you would think that in a competitive market,
who are the two mobile
Apple
firms?
and Google, iOS and Android. Yeah, right. Apple and Google. Because every dollar, so, if you crowdfund through the Apple app, if you have subscribers who are donating to the Gist through the Apple app, you're giving up 30%, right, of your revenue. That's why Patreon performers who get paid through iOS or Android are giving up 30%. Every newspaper that has subscribers through it, they're giving up 30%, right? It's a economy-wide tax that these two companies are levying, right? And you would think that if there were two firms, maybe one of them would go like, well, I'll go 25, right? And then you could see that maybe key vendors would say, okay, well, from now on, Fortnite is only available on Android and not on iOS because they'll go 25, right? And that's millions of dollars a year. It's more than we'll lose by switching to one. And then maybe that would chase them to the bottom. But that's not what happens. They hold the line. Right.
Duopolies are like this. I think the economic research indicates when you get to 4, there's a break and people can't coordinate it a lot. But duopolies are definitely or can be definitely like this.
Yeah. I mean, I think that one thing that's true is that when there's 100 companies in a sector, they really do compete. Like I started in the Napster wars, right? And you had the tech companies who were facing all kinds of outlandish demands, not just ending file sharing, but like there was a thing called the broadcast flag that was to make all digital computers under FCC jurisdiction, and that they would it would be illegal to ship a digital computer unless it was designed to resist copying without permission. Right? This is like just a gross overreach. That it actually passed under Colin Powell's son, and we sued at the EFF along with the American Library Association and other partners, and we got it overturned. But there were tech companies who were really opposed to it. And in aggregate, they were much larger than the 7 entertainment companies that were pushing for it. But those 7 companies found it very easy to speak with one voice, whereas there were tons of Vichy nerds among those hundreds of tech companies that were willing to say, oh, no, we'll sell out the whole sector because maybe we'll be the favored vendor of, these 7 entertainment companies in the cartel. So the entertainment cartel was 1/10 the size of the tech companies, but they trounced them. And so the answer here is not to consolidate tech, right? It's to deconsolidate media. We are currently running away from that as fast as we can and turning media into like one company owned by Larry Ellison. But, that would be I'm not a hardcore markets guy. I find it weird that a card-carrying member of the Democratic Socialists of America has to explain to capitalists how capitalism works. But, I have read that communist agitator, Adam Smith, who tells us that seldom do men of the same trade gather, but that the conversation turns to raising the price of goods, right? Like, it's very odd that everyone else seems to have forgotten this.
Yeah, well, a good capitalist, a true capitalist, would be against price fixing, i.e. Adam Smith. But I have to ask you, just for clarity on one thing, I understand that there's 1,000% from 3 to 30 on that one line item that the mobile companies can charge. But then you said, if I have a premium subscription, which I do, and God bless you, you have opened the door for me to plug my premium service inside. You're the first person who allowed me to do this, and you're a socialist. Okay, so here's the pricing. I work with a company called Supporting Cast. I love them. And we offer $4.99 for an ad-free subscription to the Gist, and I think it's $8.99 for the Pesca Plus tier. And of the $8.99 that Supporting Cast gets, I get something like $8. So where's the 30% that I'm giving to Apple in that transaction?
I don't know what their deal is. So they've got some kind of cool deal with Apple if they're doing that, or they're eating it and someday they'll raise the price for you because Apple's across the board number is 30. Or
but that's just
very,
with that
very
one line item, right? That's just with that one portion of their charges, no?
Well, if you go to iTunes and you click the button that says support this podcast, 30% of that price is taken by Apple. Now, they have exceptions for very small companies. So it might be that your payment processing company is sitting like below whatever $1 million a year in turnover. But if they cross that threshold, then they hit a 30%. 30%. Actually, it goes to 15% and then very quickly to 30. So they have 3 tiers. 0 for very, very small firms, and then very quickly you hit 15, and then very quickly after that you hit 30.
Okay, so
but they carve out other companies, right? Like they carve out Uber and Lyft.
I want to talk about Uber,
not like
because
a cab company.
I think Uber encapsulates somewhere in the process of Enshittification. I know that they use their technology to manipulate the wages and lower the wages of the drivers. And a story can be told that what they do is they go into a town, they destroy the cab companies, and then once they own the market, they could do whatever they want. I do not find that to be my experience as a consumer, but I talk to all the drivers, and I have a friend or a neighbor who has all these Ubers. And while it's not as good as it once was for the drivers still have the opportunity to drive yellow cabs, and none want to. The yellow cab in New York City economy was awful. So it is still an improvement, and it was technology that allowed this improvement to occur. So should we be measuring? You could talk about all that, and maybe you think I'm wrong, or maybe you think it's going to get worse. We're just on one chain of one link in the Inshittification chain. But do you think we should be judging it based on an ideal of how the market should operate, or should we be judging it on how bad the old companies they displaced were?
Yeah. So look, you're in New York, I take it then, based on that.
Correct.
So New York is unique in North America because it does have this competitive livery car and yellow cab market. So this puts limits on how badly Uber can squeeze drivers. It's very different. I live in Burbank, butt of many jokes. And I got off the train from San Diego, and the train station's right outside the Burbank airport. And there were 0 cabs in the taxi rank, which is very common because we only have 12 cabs left in Burbank. Right. The
you don't mean
cab
companies
shrunk to nothing. No, 12 cabs. There's 12 cabs in the one Burbank company. Right.
Gotcha.
So it's shrunk to nothing. There's no cabs in the cab rank. The buses don't run on Sundays anymore from there because we had a lost decade in transit investment because Uber used to lose 41 cents on the dollar. They spent $31 billion, mostly Saudi royal money, funneled through Masayoshi Son and SoftBank. And they lost 41 cents on every dollar for 13 years. And so that just made it uneconomical to operate a transit authority because the Saudis were subsidizing it. So we don't really have buses anymore on Sundays. There were no Ubers available. There were no Uber X's. There were no Uber XLs, whatever. There was only Uber Black. So I live a mile and a half from the train station. It was 115 degrees and I had a suitcase with me, and it was $96 to get home in an Uber Black. So that's definitely like a lot worse than it used to be. But I think more importantly, if you believe in disruption, and I actually do believe in disruption. I think disruption is a dirty word, but like I'm fine with moving fast and breaking like complacent billionaires things. And that's fine for me. Well, and you would want there to be disruption of Uber, right? And
disruption of Uber.
Yeah.
Like
so
via Lyft.
Well, so like via an app that let you bid out a ride to 5 different companies, right? That jailbroke their apps, right? That moved fast and broke their app. Via an app that let drivers bid out their labor to 10 different gig companies and take the highest offer. Problem is that reverse engineering their apps to do that is illegal. And unlike operating an unlicensed taxi company, which is also illegal, that actually gets you in trouble. Whereas operating an unlicensed taxi company didn't get Uber in trouble. It got them $31 billion in Saudi royal money. And so I just think what's good for the sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander here. That, I think there's a kind of vulgar Thatcherism from tech bros who are like, Thatcher used to say there is no alternative. They actually called her Tina for there is no alternative. Like, I'm a science fiction writer. That's like my actual job. I've written 30 plus books, most of them science fiction novels. And like my job is thinking up 6 alternatives every day before breakfast. And I think that, the idea that you cannot
I thought you were going to say name 4 dystopian robots, and Tina would be a great one. And then it's revealed in the last act that that's what it really stands for.
Indeed.
Like a chud twist.
Chud twist. Yeah. But decomposing these monolithic offers from tech companies into their constituent parts is like very straightforward, right? Like Mark Zuckerberg says it's inconceivable that you'd have a convenient platform to talk to your friends without like him spying on you. And I think that we can break that offer apart, right? Look, I mean, I'm a Torontonian originally, like all the best Americans, I'm a Canadian. And Torontonians worship New York, right? It takes two Torontonians to change a light bulb, one to change it, one to go to New York and make sure light bulbs are still cool. And when I would go to New York, the cab system was amazing. I could stick my hand out and get a cab. It was like being in a movie, right? But of course, it was bad for the drivers. And I think it's possible to have a cab system in New York that doesn't have predatory medallion owners that extract rent, right? Because that was the biggest problem with the cab system in New York, where were these rent extracting medallion systems. And the medallion owner said, no, these are indivisible. And of course they can be divided. Uber divided them, right? Well, now Uber says it's inconceivable that you could have a cab company without siphoning money off for us, without having these opaque labor pricing algorithms, without having deceptive pricing systems, right? I think that we can divide Uber into its constituent parts and take the parts that work and double down on them and make a business out of them. And we can reduce Uber-like functionality to a commodity backend, right? Mm-hmm. Like, imagine this, right? Imagine, there's all these driver co-ops already. None of them get very big because no one has the app installed. And because no one has the app installed to hail the co-op car, no one installs the app to be a co-op driver. But imagine if you could have the co-op app running on either device. And when my phone pages an Uber and sets up the ride, it checks a third-party server where if the driver has got the co-op app, it throws a little token on a server that says, this is the ride I've just booked. And I check to see whether that ride matches my ride. And if it does, then we tear down the Uber ride and we rebuild it as a co-op ride. We take the 25 to 50% that Uber is extracting and we split the difference, right? Mm-hmm. That disruptive, cool,
love it.
Technological, right?
Yeah.
And if Uber doesn't like it, well, no one ever promised you a profit, right? You had a bad idea. If you were too emotionally fragile to risk being disrupted, maybe you shouldn't have started a business, right? Maybe you should have gone into public service, right? Like we do unto you what you did unto the cab driver, the yellow cab medallion owners, and it's the circle of life.
So you know what joke New Yorkers tell about Torontonians?
Yeah, go.
None. We don't really consider.
No, I know, because they don't give a shit about us. Yeah, we're
adorable
little people.
I love the CN Tower. Get out of here.
Well, we call Toronto, New York, run by the Swiss. We call it the city that never sleeps in.
Lots of good underground tunnels.
Yeah.
So just a couple points. I think probably the fixed point of the airport to the home, that might not be the best. That might not be the best or most accurate comparison. It doesn't surprise me, though it is bad that your ride costs $94. And I take the fact that it was because Uber is now being the predator when they were once the prey, which often happens. But I want to ask you, what is stopping and by the way, I would say the nirvana of New York cabs, I mean, maybe compared to Toronto, but it wasn't a nirvana. Of course, it wasn't a nirvana if you were black and the cab driver could just pass 100%. You. And it wasn't a nirvana if you didn't want to go, if you wanted to go to anywhere Brooklyn. Out of Manhattan. Yeah, which is a real place to go, I've heard. But what is to stop, not within and not by using the Uber app, what is to stop someone from coming up with this technology and coming up with this app and enticing the Uber drivers who are still Uber drivers to also, since they're gig workers, have a side gig on this new, Freedom app where you can do the price matching. So you just wouldn't use Uber to do it.
I mean, we know what it is. It's network effects, right? Network effects produce durable lock-in. And digital systems break network effects. So it's one of the great things. It's why tech was so dynamic. So when Zuck was pitching those MySpace users, right? His pitch wasn't just like, come hang out on Facebook and admire my superior privacy policy while you wait for your stupid friends to join you. He gave those users a bot. It was a scraper. And you gave it your login and password for MySpace. And it would go to MySpace several times a day. It would impersonate you, log in, grab everything in your feed that was waiting to show you there, and it would put it in your Facebook feed so you could read it and reply to it and push it back out to MySpace. So you could go one at a time across from MySpace to Facebook without paying those high switching costs, without having those network effects. So, I mean, I guess the question is, why would we limit disrupting Uber to fighting with one arm tied behind your back, right? We know, why wouldn't we want the maximally effective competitive measure to be available to firms so that they could seek out new efficiencies and innovative offerings that redounded to the benefit of the firms, their investors, their workforce, and their customers, right? That sure, we could have lots of competitive measures that are less effective than the most effective competitive measure. I don't understand why we would.
Last question. I could talk to you forever, but is Blue Sky good?
Blue Sky is good. I worry that it's not, or that it wasn't born Enshittification resistant. So I think that if you imagine the kind of microeconomics of Blue Sky, so you're Jay Graber as the CEO, who, as far as I can tell, is just a wonderful person. She seems really smart and right on. And someone comes to her and says, we are your investor. Their primary investor is the very sinister named Blockchain Capital, which just like it might as well be called crummy grift capital. But if they go,
yeah, well, the Turing Van Nyman machine, I mean, is named after a person who was hounded into committing suicide. And
but he was a good guy.
Oh, sure, he was.
Yeah,
There's like a lot of sadness associated with those two guys.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but if like Blockchain Capital goes to her and says like, you've got to do something rotten to your service. Now she might say, I quit, right? And I'd lionize her for doing it if that was the case. But then they just hire someone to do it. But if on the other hand, she could say, we designed Blue Sky initially so that it was federated, so that you could leave the Blue Sky server but continue to exchange messages with the people who stayed. Right? Which is how federation is supposed to work. And instead of so they've just started getting that working. I actually have a Blue Sky server of my own coming online next week. I'm going to be joining Blue Sky through my own server. But instead of doing that, we focus mostly on just making Blue Sky as good a user experience on the main server for as long as possible. Now we have whatever it is, 30 million users on Blue Sky. And we've effectively built like an incredibly great nightclub with a really swinging party, and it doesn't have any fire exits. And if someone orders me to set fire to Blue Sky, no one's going to be able to leave. They're going to be stuck there by each other, right? But if there were fire exits, if from day one you could leave Blue Sky, and if at any given time half of the Blue Sky users were not on the Blue Sky server, then when Jay Graber's investor goes to her and says, time to break Blue Sky. The moment of redemption is upon us. The freebie is over. We're going to start taking stuff back from users. We're going to spy on them. We're going to charge them. We're going to fill their feed with garbage. She could say, well, look, you're the boss, right? Either I do this or you'll fire me and someone else will do it. But you have to know the service will be dead in an hour, right? Like the users will just quit because it costs them nothing to leave. They can continue to enjoy all the benefits of it. Well, then, ideally, you would hope that the investor would be a rational actor there and just curb their greed. But if not, well, then we'd leave.
So my experience with Blue Sky is you could say it's a really swinging party without the fire exits. I hadn't considered that. So your argument is basically it could go really bad. It could become the Copacabana. But my experience is more, it might be a swinging party, but there is a very narrow band of dress code. There is a very narrow band of music that they play. In other words, I'll concede or not argue the point that it's better than Twitter. It certainly doesn't have some of the most horrible downsides of Twitter. But I would say that if I polled people about how much they liked or enjoyed or got something out of Blue Sky, it would be extremely correlative to who their 5 favorite senators were.
Sure.
So it's not exactly. Yeah. So it's not exactly a public square, as it were.
Well, look, I think that I have that kind of, I guess, the epistemic humility to say, I'm not going to tell you what kind of conversation I think you should be having. What I am going to say is that I want your right, where if you don't like the conversation, you can it's easy for you to leave without enduring costs. So I don't know why you're on Blue Sky, if that's how you reach people who subscribe or, some other thing.
I'm on Blue Sky because I believe in something like the ideal of talking to people who are interesting, who aren't abusive, who might disagree. But that last part about might disagree, I mean, what I'm saying is it comes at an extremely high cost sometimes on Blue Sky. Not extremely high, but it just makes Blue Sky for a non-DSA member less enjoyable than a DSA member. But I also think this goes back to it's not our tools, it's ourselves. There is something, or maybe you think there just is something about the clustering and tribalism of human nature that no matter what the big alternative of Twitter was going to be, it was going to be an alternative in every way, including, the politics of the average or median user.
So I don't know that network design has a huge impact on politics. I mean, moderation may, but network design doesn't for sure. What I would say is that we we not only do we not know what the ideal conversational arrangement for a planetary-wide public square is, but there's probably not just one. It's probably a dynamic thing that changes based on contingent political and social circumstances, right? And that, again, you know, the kind of value of competition, this is an argument I get into with leftists all the time. They say, well, why are we fetishizing competition? This should just all be a utility. Competition is very wasteful. I'm like, well, the idea here is like to have a diverse set of tools and a diverse set of forums. People have diverse proclivities. I have friends, I call them, you know, like they have a Six Sigma limbic system where they just love like getting into these really heated arguments and it doesn't make them feel terrible later. Whereas when I get into those, I feel miserable. And it's like, let those people cook, give them a place, right? Like, I think that, if there's a mistake that tech progressives made, and I called it a mistake then, and I think I've been vindicated, it was in deploring the existence of off-platform places like 4chan, 8chan, Kiwi Farms, and so on, and calling them the dark corners of the internet with the implication that we should all be gathered under Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey's moderation thumb. And then what we do is we work the ref to make sure that the moderation is good. And what that ended up with is just the worst people in the world had got to set their own moderation norms, and everyone else had to have moderation norms set by these two callow idiots. And I just think that like we should have as much autonomy as is practical. You know, that like to, you know, sure, there are times where you have to, you know, sacrifice your own interest to a common interest, but there's no virtue in doing that. We should do that as much as we need to thrive, but we shouldn't do it more than that. And I think that like giving people more autonomy to choose how their forums are moderated, you know, Mastodon, which is like a smaller open source blue sky alternative that is truly federated, servers have their own rules. You know, Truth Social is a Mastodon server. It has rules that are very different from the Mastodon server that I'm on, right? And yet the two of them could federate to exchange messages at their own discretion, right? I think that's like that's a good arrangement.
Cory Doctorow has for nearly a quarter of a century worked with the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He's the author of over 30 books, yowza. His latest is Inshittification, Why Everything Suddenly Got Worse and What to Do About It. Our Enshittifications are talking to each other.
There we go.
Thanks so much, Cory.
All right. Thank you.